The scent of lavender soap clung to Zelda Zimmerman's trembling hands as she stood before the cracked mirror in her bedroom, knowing that in 3 hours she would become the wife of the most feared man in Central City, Colorado, a man whose previous 2 wives had both died under circumstances the sheriff refused to investigate. August 1878 had brought scorching heat to the mountain mining town, and through her window, Zelda could see the dust rising from Main Street, where miners and gamblers moved between saloons even at this early hour. She was 20 years old, and her father had sold her future to pay gambling debts that would have landed him in prison or worse. Silas Blackthorne owned half the silver mines in the territory, controlled the law, and had a reputation for cruelty that made even hardened criminals cross the street when he approached. The bruises she had already seen on the servants who worked in his mansion told stories their mouths dared not speak. Her mother had died when Zelda was 12, and her father had spiraled into drink and cards, leaving her to raise her 2 younger sisters alone. Now those sisters sat on her bed, 14-year-old Margaret weeping openly, while 16-year-old Sarah held her hand with white knuckles. Their father had made his devil's bargain clear: marry Blackthorne, or watch their family lose everything, including the small house they called home. Zelda had agreed because she loved her sisters more than she feared death, but that did not make the terror any less real. "You don't have to do this," Sarah whispered, though they both knew it was a lie. "I do," Zelda said, forcing steadiness into her voice, "and I will survive him. I promise you both." The wedding dress hung on the wardrobe door, an expensive creation of white silk and lace that Blackthorne had ordered from San Francisco. It was beautiful and felt like a burial shroud. Zelda had tried it on once 3 days ago, and had been unable to breathe properly, corseted and constrained, a pretty package for a monster to unwrap. A knock at the door made all 3 sisters jump. Their father's voice, slurred even this early, called through the wood. "Zelda, the carriage will be here in 2 hours. Start getting ready." She did not answer him. Since he had told her of the arrangement 6 weeks ago, she had barely spoken to him at all. Let him live with his guilt, if he had any capacity for such an emotion left. Margaret buried her face in Zelda's shoulder. "I heard Mrs. Patterson at the Mercantile say his second wife lasted only 8 months before she fell down the stairs." "That's enough," Sarah said sharply, though her own face had gone pale. Zelda stroked Margaret's hair, the same honey blonde shade as her own. They all had their mother's coloring, fair and light, while their father had been dark. It was one of the few things Zelda was grateful for, to look in the mirror and see her mother's features rather than the man who had betrayed her. The morning crept forward with agonizing slowness. Zelda bathed in cold water, trying to calm her racing heart. She pinned up her hair, weaving in the small white flowers Sarah had picked from their meager garden. She laced herself into the undergarments and stockings, each layer feeling like armor that would provide no actual protection. Sarah helped her with the dress, and Margaret fastened the tiny pearl buttons that ran up the back. When Zelda looked at her reflection, she saw a stranger, a beautiful ghost, a sacrifice dressed for the altar. The church bells began to ring at 11 o'clock, calling the town to witness her doom. Central City's population had swelled to nearly 3,000 souls with the silver boom, and it seemed half of them would attend, drawn by curiosity or Blackthorne's influence, or the simple human desire to witness spectacle. Zelda descended the stairs to find her father waiting, dressed in his one good suit, reeking of whiskey he had used to fortify his courage. "You look beautiful," he said, and she turned her face away. The carriage was black lacquer with gold trim, drawn by 4 matched horses the color of midnight. A driver sat rigid on the bench, his face carefully blank. Zelda climbed inside without accepting her father's hand, arranging her skirts around her. Through the window she could see neighbors gathering on their porches, watching. Some faces showed pity. Others showed relief that it was not their daughter climbing into that carriage. The church sat at the top of Main Street, a white wooden structure with a bell tower that had cost Blackthorne's money to build. Everything in Central City bore his stamp somehow, his influence woven through the town like veins of silver through rock. As they rolled up the dusty street, Zelda tried to pray, but the words stuck in her throat. What kind of God allowed such things? The carriage slowed, then stopped. But they were not at the church yet. They were in front of the Silver Star Saloon, and Zelda's breath caught as she heard raised voices outside. The door opened suddenly, violently. But instead of her father's face, Zelda found herself looking at a man she had never seen before. He was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair that curled over his collar and eyes the color of sage brush in summer. Dust covered his clothes and stubble shadowed his jaw. He wore a gun belt low on his hips and a battered hat in his hand, and when he looked at her, something flickered in his expression that might have been recognition or fate or simple human decency. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, his voice low and urgent. "My name is Xavier Quentin, and I am giving you one chance to change your future. Come with me right now or forever hold your peace." Behind him, Zelda could see chaos. Her father was on the ground, holding his jaw. Two men she recognized as Blackthorne's hired guns were running toward the saloon from up the street. The church bells were still ringing. "Who are you?" she managed to ask. "Someone who lost his sister to that monster 3 years ago," Xavier said. "Mary was his first wife. She was 19 when he married her, 20 when she died. I have been tracking Blackthorne ever since, and I will not stand by and watch him take another innocent woman." The running men were getting closer. Xavier's horse, a rangy buckskin stallion, stamped its feet nearby, already sensing urgency. "Please," Xavier said and extended his hand. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but I swear on my sister's grave I will get you to safety or die trying." Zelda looked at his hand. Looked at the church up the street, where Silas Blackthorne would be waiting in his expensive suit, his cold eyes tracking every minute that passed. Looked at the men running toward them with murder in their expressions. Looked at this stranger who claimed to have lost his sister the same way Zelda feared losing her own life. She took his hand. Xavier pulled her from the carriage with surprising gentleness, though his movements were swift. He lifted her onto his horse in a rustle of silk and petticoats, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to grip the reins, and Zelda could feel the solid warmth of his chest against her back, could smell leather and sage and honest sweat. "Hold on," he said, and the horse exploded into motion. They thundered down Main Street in the opposite direction of the church, scattering pedestrians and chickens alike. Zelda grabbed the saddle horn with one hand and clutched her skirts with the other, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Behind them, men were shouting. A gunshot cracked the air, and Xavier urged the horse faster, leaning low over Zelda's shoulder. "Are you hurt?" He called over the wind. "No," she gasped, and realized she was almost laughing. Terror and exhilaration swirled together in her chest until she could not tell them apart. They raced out of Central City on the southern road, leaving the mining town and its church bells behind. The buckskin horse ran with smooth power, his hooves eating up the dusty ground. Zelda could hear pursuit behind them, more horses, more gunshots. But Xavier seemed to know every turn and twist of the mountain roads, guiding them off the main path and onto a narrow trail that climbed through pine forests and granite outcroppings. For an hour they rode hard, always climbing, always moving. The wedding dress was never made for horseback riding, and Zelda could feel seams tearing, could feel branches catching at the delicate lace. She did not care. Every step away from Central City was a step towards something that was not certain death. Finally, Xavier slowed the horse, though he kept moving, kept them in motion. They had reached high country now, where the air thinned and cooled. Zelda's ears rang in the sudden relative quiet. "I think we lost them," Xavier said. "At least for now. Blackthorne's men know these mountains, but I know them better." "Are you all right?" "I think so," Zelda said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "My sisters, he will hurt my sisters." "No," Xavier said firmly. "He won't. I have friends in town who will make sure they are protected." "This was planned, Miss Zimmerman. I did not act on impulse." "You planned to kidnap me from my own wedding." "I planned to offer you an escape," Xavier corrected. "You could have said no, and married a murderer instead." Zelda twisted in the saddle, trying to look at him. "You said he killed your sister." Xavier's jaw tightened, and something dark passed through his eyes. "Mary was my twin. We grew up in Missouri, orphaned young, had only each other. When she turned 18, she wanted adventure, wanted to see the West. We came to Colorado together, and she took a job as a schoolteacher in Central City. Silas Blackthorne saw her one day and decided he had to have her. Within a month they were married. Within a year she was dead." "How?" Zelda asked quietly. "Officially, she fell down the stairs and broke her neck. Unofficially, I saw the bruises on her arms when I visited 2 weeks before she died. I saw the fear in her eyes. She wanted to leave him, but he told her if she tried, he would make sure I died in a mining accident." Xavier's voice was rough with old pain. "She stayed to protect me, and it killed her." "I am so sorry," Zelda said, and meant it with her whole heart. "After Mary died, I left Central City. Became a drifter, a hired gun, did work I am not proud of, but I kept track of Blackthorne. When I heard he had married again, I tried to get back in time, but I was too late. Wife number 2 died before I could reach Colorado. When word spread that he was planning another wedding, I swore it would be the last time." They rode in silence for a while, the horse's steady gait carrying them through a meadow filled with wildflowers and the buzz of late summer insects. Zelda's mind spun with everything that had happened, everything that had changed in the span of minutes. She was free of Blackthorne, but she was also a woman alone in the wilderness with a man she did not know, wearing a torn wedding dress with no possessions beyond the clothes on her back. "Where are we going?" she asked. "South," Xavier said. "Out of Blackthorne's territory. I have a cabin about 30 miles from here near a town called Fairplay. We will be safe there while we figure out the next step." "What is the next step?" "That depends on what you want," Xavier said. "I can get you to Denver, get you on a train east if you have family elsewhere. Or I can help you start fresh somewhere new. But you cannot go back to Central City, Miss Zimmerman. Not while Silas Blackthorne lives and breathes." The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in now, cold and heavy. "My sisters," she said again. "Margaret and Sarah. They need me." "And Blackthorne will use that against you," Xavier said. "It is why I have friends watching them. Once we are certain you are safe, we will find a way to bring them to you. But if you go back now, he will lock you in that mansion and you will never see the sun again except through barred windows." Zelda knew he was right. She had heard the stories, whispered in shops and over wash lines. Blackthorne's wives disappeared into his house like ghosts, rarely seen in town, their servants too frightened to speak. Going back would be suicide. "Then I want to stay alive," she said. "And I want my sisters safe. Everything else can come after." "Fair enough," Xavier said, and she heard approval in his voice. They rode through the afternoon, stopping twice to rest the horse and drink from cold mountain streams. The wedding dress became increasingly bedraggled, the hem stained with dirt and torn by brambles. Zelda's hair came loose from its pins, tumbling down her back in a blonde cascade. She was hungry and thirsty and more tired than she had ever been, but she was also alive, breathing mountain air, watching hawks circle overhead in a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Xavier proved to be a considerate companion, offering her his canteen without her needing to ask, helping her down from the horse so her legs would not cramp, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories of the region to keep her mind occupied. He had a quiet way of speaking, thoughtful pauses between words, as though he weighed each sentence before releasing it. His sister's death had marked him, Zelda could see, carved lines beside his mouth and shadows in his eyes that no 25-year-old man should carry. As evening approached, the temperature dropped sharply. This high in the mountains, even August nights required warmth. Xavier removed his duster coat and draped it over Zelda's shoulders without comment, and she pulled it gratefully around her, inhaling the scent of leather and wood smoke that clung to the fabric. "The cabin is just over this next ridge," Xavier said. "We will arrive before full dark." True to his word, as the sun touched the western peaks and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, a small structure came into view. It sat in a sheltered valley, surrounded by aspen and pine with a creek running nearby. The cabin was simple but well built, with a stone chimney and a small corral for the horse. Xavier dismounted and helped Zelda down. Her legs nearly buckled after so many hours in the saddle, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow until she found her balance. "Not much," he said, gesturing at the cabin, "but it is dry and defensible. I have used it as a base for the past few months while watching Blackthorne." Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. A bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, shelves holding basic supplies. Xavier moved through the space with practiced efficiency, lighting a lantern, starting a fire, fetching water from the creek. Zelda stood uncertainly in the middle of the room, suddenly aware that she was alone with this man, that she knew almost nothing about him beyond what he had told her. Xavier seemed to sense her uncertainty. He straightened from the fireplace, dusting off his hands. "You take the bed," he said. "I will sleep on the floor. In the morning, I will ride into Fairplay and send word to my contacts in Central City about your sisters. You will be safe here. I give you my word." "Why are you doing this?" Zelda asked. "You risked your life today. You could have been killed." Xavier looked at her across the firelight, and his expression was complex, layered with grief and determination and something else she could not quite name. "Because Mary would have wanted me to," he said simply. "Because no woman should be sold to a monster, because it was the right thing to do." "Thank you," Zelda said, and her voice broke on the words. "Thank you for seeing me as worth saving." "Miss Zimmerman," Xavier said gently, "you were always worth saving. The crime is that you needed saving at all." That night, Zelda lay in the narrow bed wearing one of Xavier's spare shirts as a nightgown, her ruined wedding dress draped over a chair like a ghost. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the sky in impossible profusion. More stars than she had ever seen from Central City, where mine fires and lamps dimmed the heavens. She could hear Xavier's steady breathing from where he lay near the fire, his presence somehow comforting rather than threatening. She thought about her sisters, hoped they were safe. Thought about her father and found she could not muster even anger anymore, just a hollow disappointment. Thought about Silas Blackthorne and the fate she had escaped, and offered a silent prayer of gratitude to the cowboy, who had given her a second chance at life. Sleep came eventually, deep and dreamless, the exhaustion of the day pulling her under like a tide. Zelda woke to the smell of coffee and bacon frying. For a disoriented moment, she forgot where she was, reaching for familiar surroundings. Then memory flooded back and she sat up, pushing hair from her face. Xavier stood at the fireplace, cooking breakfast with the ease of a man long accustomed to caring for himself. Morning light streamed through the window, painting everything gold. "Good morning," he said without turning. "I figured you would be hungry, starving," Zelda admitted. She had not eaten since a few bites of toast the previous morning, her stomach too twisted with nerves to accept more. They ate together at the small table, and the food was simple but delicious. Xavier had supplies enough for several days, he explained, but he would ride into Fairplay that morning to send telegrams and get news. "How long until we know about my sisters?" Zelda asked. "A day, maybe two," Xavier said. "I have a friend named William Cornish who works at the land office in Central City. He is a good man, fought to help Mary when she was alive. He will make sure your sisters are protected and get word to us about the situation." After breakfast, Xavier prepared to leave. He saddled the buckskin horse and checked his weapons with practiced movements. Before mounting, he turned to Zelda where she stood in the cabin doorway. "Keep the door barred while I am gone," he said. "There is a rifle over the fireplace if you need it, though I do not expect trouble this far out. I will be back before nightfall." "Be careful," Zelda said, and was surprised by how much she meant it. Xavier smiled, the expression transforming his serious face into something warmer. "Yes, madam," he said, and rode away down the valley. Alone, Zelda explored her temporary sanctuary. The cabin was tidy and organized, everything in its place. She found spare clothes, a few books, a harmonica, evidence of Xavier's solitary life. In the corner near the bed was a small painted miniature in a wooden frame, showing a young woman with dark hair and laughing eyes. Mary, Zelda guessed. Xavier's twin, the sister he had lost. Zelda picked up the portrait carefully, studying the face. Mary looked happy in the painting, full of life and hope. It made her death even more tragic, all that brightness extinguished by a cruel man's cruelty. The day passed slowly. Zelda washed her hair in the creek, the cold water shocking but refreshing. She attempted to salvage the wedding dress but gave up quickly. It was beyond repair. Instead, she borrowed a pair of Xavier's trousers and a clean shirt, rolling up the cuffs and cinching the waist with a length of rope. The freedom of movement was startling after years of corsets and heavy skirts. She was reading one of Xavier's books, a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets, when she heard the horse approaching. The sun was low in the sky, painting the valley in shades of amber and rose. Zelda set down the book and went to the door, relief flooding through her when she confirmed it was Xavier returning. He dismounted, and Zelda could see immediately that something was wrong. His face was grim, his shoulders tight with tension. "What happened?" she asked, fear clutching at her chest. "Are my sisters all right?" "Your sisters are safe," Xavier said quickly. "William got word to me that they are staying with the preacher's family, under protection. Blackthorne cannot touch them without drawing attention he does not want." "Then what is wrong?" Xavier tied off his horse and turned to face her fully. "Blackthorne has put a bounty on us. $2,000 for information leading to your return, $500 for me, dead or alive." By now, every bounty hunter and desperate man in the territory knows to be looking for a blonde woman and a dark-haired cowboy traveling together. $2,000. It was a fortune, more money than most men saw in 5 years, enough to tempt even honest men to betrayal. "What do we do?" Zelda asked. "We keep moving," Xavier said. "I do not like it, but staying here is too dangerous now. I bought supplies in Fairplay, enough to get us to Denver. From there, we can get you on a train to California or back east, somewhere Blackthorne's reach does not extend." "And my sisters?" Once you are safe, I will come back for them. I promise you, Zelda." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a strange warmth through her chest. "I will not let him hurt them." They left at first light the next morning, when mist still clung to the valley floor and the air was sharp with cold. Xavier had purchased a second horse in Fairplay, a gentle mare for Zelda, along with proper riding clothes that fit her better than his oversized garments. They packed light and moved fast, keeping to back trails and avoiding towns where possible. The journey to Denver would take nearly a week of hard riding, crossing multiple mountain passes and dangerous country. It was wild territory, home to mining camps and isolated ranches, where law was a suggestion and survival depended on strength and wit. Xavier proved to be an excellent guide, navigating by stars and landmarks, always aware of their surroundings. They fell into an easy rhythm of travel. Xavier taught Zelda how to shoot, spending an hour one afternoon helping her practice with his spare revolver, until she could hit a target more often than not. They took turns cooking simple meals over evening campfires, and Xavier proved surprisingly good at making even hardtack and beans taste decent. More importantly, they talked. Long conversations that stretched into the night while the fire burned low and coyotes called in the distance. Zelda told Xavier about her mother, about raising her sisters, about the slow deterioration of her father after her mother's death. Xavier told her about his childhood in Missouri, about coming west with Mary, about the jobs he had taken and the places he had seen. "I was not always a drifter," he said one night, 3 days into their journey. They were camped in a grove of cottonwoods near a stream, the horses hobbled nearby. "Before Mary died, I had plans, wanted to start a ranch, raise horses. Had even found a piece of land near Boulder that would have been perfect." "What stopped you?" Zelda asked. "Grief," Xavier said simply. "And guilt." "I kept thinking if I had gotten Mary away from Blackthorne sooner, if I had been more insistent, if I had simply stolen her away the way I stole you, she would still be alive." "That is not fair to yourself," Zelda said. "You cannot carry that blame." "I know," Xavier said. "In my head I know. My heart is slower to learn the lesson." Zelda understood that. She carried her own guilts, her own what-ifs. What if she had refused her father's bargain? What if she had taken her sisters and run before the wedding? But dwelling on alternative pasts changed nothing about the present. On the 4th day, they had their first real trouble. They were following a narrow trail through heavy timber when Xavier suddenly raised a hand, signaling Zelda to stop. She obeyed immediately, her hand moving to the revolver at her hip as Xavier had taught her. 3 men emerged from the trees ahead, spreading out to block the trail. They were rough-looking, with the hard eyes of men who lived outside the law. The one in the middle was older, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. "Well now," Scar said, showing yellowed teeth in a predatory grin. "Looks like we found us some lost travelers. You not be that blonde woman and her cowboy everyone is talking about, would you?" "We are just passing through," Xavier said calmly, though Zelda could see the tension in his shoulders. "No need for trouble." $2,000 says different," Scar replied. "That is a lot of money for one woman. We will take her peaceful or we will take her fighting." "Your choice, cowboy." "My choice," Xavier said, "is that you turn around and walk away while you still can." Scar laughed. 3 against 1. "I like our odds." 3 against 2, Zelda said, and drew her revolver, keeping it trained on the man to Scar's left. Her hand trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "And I am a very good shot at this range." The men hesitated, clearly not expecting armed resistance from a woman. In that moment of uncertainty, Xavier moved. His gun cleared leather faster than Zelda could track, and he fired once. Scar yelped and grabbed his shoulder, blood blooming through his shirt. The next one goes through your heart, Xavier said, his voice cold as winter ice. Leave. Now. The three men backed away, supporting their wounded leader, and melted into the forest. Xavier kept his gun out, listening, until he was certain they were truly gone. "Are you all right?" he asked Zelda, holstering his weapon. "Yes," she said, though adrenaline was making her shake. "Thank you for not killing them. Killing should always be the last option," Xavier said. "But I would have done it to protect you. Never doubt that." They rode hard after that, wanting distance between themselves and the bounty hunters. That night, they made a cold camp with no fire, sleeping in shifts with weapons close at hand. Zelda took the second watch, sitting with Xavier's rifle across her lap, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness around them. The stars wheeled overhead, vast and indifferent. Somewhere out there, Silas Blackthorne was still searching for her, still determined to reclaim what he saw as his property. But here, in this moment, Zelda was free. She had a gun in her hands and a future that was uncertain but her own to shape. When she woke Xavier for his watch, his hand closed over hers on the rifle, warm and strong. "You did well today," he said quietly. "With those men, you did not panic." "I was terrified," Zelda admitted. "Courage is not the absence of fear," Xavier said. "It is acting despite the fear." "You have more courage than most people I have met, Zelda Zimmerman." His words settled into her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer night. In the 4 days since he had pulled her from that carriage, Xavier had become more than her rescuer. He had become her companion, her teacher, her friend. She trusted him in a way she had not trusted anyone since her mother died. And more than that, though she barely dared acknowledge it even to herself, she was starting to care for him, to notice the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, to appreciate the strength in his hands and the gentleness in his touch, to find comfort in his presence and peace in his voice. It was dangerous to feel such things. They were fugitives together, bound by circumstance and necessity. Once she was safely in Denver, Xavier would return to Central City to fulfill his promise about her sisters, and she would board a train to a new life somewhere far away. There was no future in caring for him, but her heart, it seemed, had its own ideas. They reached the outskirts of Denver on a hot afternoon 6 days after leaving the cabin. The city sprawled across the plains where the mountains met the prairie, a rapidly growing hub of commerce and civilization. After days of wilderness and small trails, the noise and crowds felt overwhelming. Xavier led them to a modest boarding house on the edge of town, run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher who asked no questions and accepted cash without comment. She gave them 2 rooms side by side, clean and simple, with real beds and washing facilities. "I will go make inquiries about train schedules and tickets," Xavier said once they had settled in. "You should rest. We have pushed hard to get here." "Wait," Zelda said. Now that they had reached Denver, the reality of parting was rushing toward her with uncomfortable speed. "What happens next?" "After you get me on a train." Xavier leaned against the doorframe, and something complicated passed across his face. "I go back for your sisters, like I promised. Make sure they get somewhere safe, away from Blackthorne's reach. And then I suppose I figure out what comes next for me," Xavier said. "I have been so focused on stopping Blackthorne, I have not thought much beyond it." Zelda wanted to ask if those next steps might include her. Wanted to say that the thought of boarding a train alone, of never seeing him again, made her chest ache in ways she did not fully understand. But the words stuck in her throat, pride and uncertainty holding them hostage. "Thank you," she said instead, "for everything. I owe you my life." "You owe me nothing," Xavier said firmly. "What I did because it was right, not for debt or obligation." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. But I want you to know, Zelda, these past days with you, they have meant something to me. You are a remarkable woman." Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Zelda sat on the bed, her heart racing, wondering if she was reading too much into his words or not enough. She spent the afternoon washing away trail dust and trying on the simple dress Xavier had bought for her in Fairplay, practical calico in dark blue. It was strange to wear a dress again after days in trousers, to feel confined by skirts and petticoats. But it was necessary armor for navigating city streets, where a woman in men's clothes would draw unwanted attention. Xavier returned as evening fell, bringing food and news. "There is a train leaving for San Francisco the day after tomorrow," he said as they ate together in her room, the door properly open for propriety's sake. "I have purchased a ticket in the name of Miss Zimmerman. Once you reach California, you can start fresh. I have also wired some money to be waiting for you at a bank in San Francisco. Not much, but enough to get you settled." "Xavier, I cannot accept your money," Zelda protested. "Consider it payment for making my sister smile," Xavier said. "Mary would have liked you very much. She always stood up for people who needed standing up for." They were quiet for a moment, the weight of impending separation hanging between them. "Have you heard anything from Central City?" Zelda asked. "About my sisters." William sent a telegram. "Your sisters are safe and well. The preacher's wife has taken them in properly. Blackthorne tried to make a fuss, claimed you were stolen property, but the sheriff, who is actually decent unlike most of his deputies, told him there is no law that says a woman cannot change her mind about marriage." Relief flooded through Zelda. "When will you bring them to me?" "I need a few weeks to make arrangements," Xavier said. "It has to be done carefully so Blackthorne cannot track them, but I promise you, Zelda, you will see them again." The next day passed too quickly. Xavier took Zelda around Denver, showing her the city, buying her additional supplies for her journey. They walked along the Platte River in the afternoon sunshine, talking about everything and nothing, both carefully avoiding the topic of what came after tomorrow. That evening, back at the boarding house, Zelda found she could not settle. She paced her small room, anxiety and restlessness warring in her chest. Finally, unable to bear her own company any longer, she knocked on Xavier's door. He opened it in shirt sleeves, his hair damp from washing. "Zelda." "Is something wrong?" "I cannot do this," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I cannot get on that train tomorrow and leave you behind, not like this." "Zelda," Xavier said carefully, "you have to go. It is the only way to ensure your safety." "I know that," Zelda said. "But I need you to know something first. These past days with you, they have been the freest and happiest I have felt since my mother died. You saved me, yes, but more than that, you saw me. You treated me like a person with value and choices and worth. And I think I am falling in love with you, Xavier Quentin, and I needed you to know that before I left." The silence that followed felt eternal. Xavier stared at her, something fierce and bright kindling in his eyes. "Zelda," he said, his voice rough. "I have been fighting that same feeling since the day I pulled you onto my horse. I told myself it was wrong, that you were vulnerable, and I was the only thing standing between you and Blackthorne. I did not want to take advantage, but the truth is, I have fallen in love with you too. Completely and irrevocably in love with you." "Then why am I leaving?" Zelda asked, stepping closer to him. "Because I want you safe," Xavier said. "Because I want you to have choices, not be tied to a drifter with a dangerous past and an uncertain future." "What if my choice is you?" Zelda reached up, cupping his face in her hands. "What if I want the uncertain future as long as you are in it?" Xavier covered her hands with his own, turning to press a kiss to her palm. "Then I would say I am the luckiest man alive. But Zelda, there are things you need to know about me. The jobs I've taken, the men I have worked for. I am not a good man. You are the best man I know, Zelda said firmly. You risked everything to save me. You have been nothing but honorable and kind. Whatever your past holds, it does not change who you are now. I love you, Xavier said again, wonder in his voice. God help me, I love you so much. Then kiss me, Zelda whispered. Please. Xavier pulled her close and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. His lips were soft against hers, his hands gentle on her back, and Zelda melted into him, into this moment of perfect rightness. The kiss deepened, growing more urgent, and Zelda felt as though she was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. Not because you have to, not because of arrangement or obligation, but because you want to, because we choose each other freely. Yes, Zelda said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, Xavier, I will marry you. They were married the next morning by a judge in Denver, with Mrs. Fletcher and her grown son standing as witnesses. Zelda wore the blue calico dress and wildflowers in her hair. Xavier wore his cleanest shirt and a nervous smile. They spoke their vows with hands clasped tight, promising to love and honor and cherish through all the uncertainties ahead. The judge pronounced them husband and wife, and Xavier kissed her again, sweet and sure, sealing their future together. I need to tell you my new plan, Xavier said as they walked back to the boarding house, now truly together. We are not going to run anymore. We are going to stay in Denver, at least for now. I am going to wire the U.S. Marshal's office and tell them everything I know about Silas Blackthorne. His illegal mining practices, the murders, all of it. With your testimony about your father's debt and the forced marriage, with William's testimony about Mary, we might actually be able to see him brought to justice. That is dangerous, Zelda said. Life is dangerous, Xavier replied. But I am tired of running from men like Blackthorne, and you deserve to have your sisters with you, not hidden away in fear. Zelda thought about it, about the risk and the potential reward. All right, she said, but we do this together, as partners. As partners, Xavier agreed. The next weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Xavier made contact with a U.S. Marshal named Thomas Garrett, who had been investigating Blackthorne for years without enough evidence to make charges stick. With Zelda and Xavier's testimony, along with William's documentation about Mary's death and the suspicious circumstances surrounding wife number 2, Marshal Garrett finally had enough to act. A month after Zelda's failed wedding, federal marshals arrested Silas Blackthorne on charges of fraud, murder, and extortion. The trial was set for October in Denver, away from Blackthorne's sphere of influence. During this time, Xavier was true to his word. He returned to Central City with Marshal Garrett's protection and brought Zelda's sisters to Denver. The reunion was tearful and joyous, Margaret and Sarah clinging to Zelda and marveling at the changes in her. She was harder now, tougher, but also happier than they had ever seen her. You married him, Sarah asked, studying Xavier with open curiosity. The cowboy who rescued you. I married him because I love him, Zelda corrected. The rescuing was just how we met. Xavier found work in Denver as a horse trainer while waiting for the trial, and they rented a small house with enough room for Zelda's sisters. It was modest but cheerful, filled with light and laughter in ways their old house in Central City had never been. Zelda's father had not tried to contact them, perhaps understanding he had burned that bridge beyond repair. The trial began on a cold October morning when the aspens had turned gold and the air smelled of coming snow. Zelda testified about the arranged marriage, about the bruises on Blackthorne's servants, about the fear she had felt. Xavier testified about his sister's death. William Cornish brought documents showing a pattern of violence and corruption. Silas Blackthorne sat in the defendant's chair and said nothing, his cold eyes tracking every witness with reptilian focus. But his silence and his intimidation tactics meant nothing in a federal court, far from his bought and paid for local officials. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Blackthorne would hang for Mary's murder and the murder of his second wife, whose body had been exhumed and found to have a crushed skull inconsistent with a fall downstairs. As the sentence was read, Zelda felt Xavier's hand find hers. She squeezed tight, feeling the weight of these past months finally lift from her shoulders. Justice had been served. They were free. The hanging took place 2 weeks later, but neither Zelda nor Xavier attended. They had given enough of their lives to Silas Blackthorne. Instead, they spent the day riding up into the mountains, just the two of them, breathing clean air and making plans for their future. "I think I want to buy that land near Boulder," Xavier said. "The piece I mentioned before. Start that horse ranch I once dreamed of." "I think that sounds perfect," Zelda said. "Your sisters could help. Sarah is good with animals." "Our sisters," Xavier corrected with a smile. "They are our family now. Over the winter they made it happen." Xavier had saved money from his various jobs, and the reward money from Blackthorne's arrest helped as well. They purchased 80 acres of good land with mountain views and a creek running through it, built a house and a barn, started acquiring horses. It was hard work, the kind that left them exhausted and satisfied at the end of each day. Margaret and Sarah thrived in their new life, growing strong and confident. Sarah proved to have a natural gift with horses, while Margaret discovered a talent for gardening, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the Colorado soil. Zelda learned to run a household and a business at the same time, managing accounts and dealing with buyers. Xavier trained horses with patience and skill, building a reputation throughout the territory for quality stock. And in the evenings when the work was done, Zelda and Xavier would sit on their porch and watch the sun set behind the mountains, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest, both of them marveling at how far they had come from that desperate August day in Central City. "Do you ever regret it?" Zelda asked one such evening a year after their marriage. "That you cannot go back and save Mary too?" Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "I will always grieve Mary," he said finally, "but I cannot change the past. What I can do is honor her memory by living well, by being happy, by protecting the people I love. She would have wanted that for me." "I wish I could have known her," Zelda said. "She would have loved you," Xavier said, kissing the top of her head, "almost as much as I do." Life continued its forward march. Their horse ranch grew and prospered. Margaret married a young veterinarian who had come west from Boston, a kind man with gentle hands and a love of animals that matched her own. Sarah showed no interest in marriage yet, preferring to work with the horses and talk about maybe starting her own breeding program someday. And 2 years after that day, when Xavier had pulled Zelda from a wedding carriage, she gave him news that made his face light up with joy. They would become parents come spring, adding another member to their growing family. Their son was born on an April morning when the meadows were full of wildflowers and new colts. They named him Nathan, a strong name for a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. Xavier held his son with shaking hands and tears on his cheeks, and Zelda fell in love with both of them all over again. Nathan was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Mary, after the sister Xavier had lost. And then another son, and then twin girls who looked exactly like their mother. Their house filled with laughter and chaos, with skinned knees and birthday celebrations, with all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that make up a life. Zelda sometimes thought about her father, wondered if he ever regretted his choices. She had received one letter from him, years after they had left Central City, a drunken ramble that might have been an apology or might have been an excuse. She had read it once and burned it, feeling nothing but a distant pity for the man who had chosen cards over his children. She thought more often about that alternate future, the one where Xavier had not intervened. The future as Blackthorne's wife, trapped in that mansion, her spirit slowly crushed under the weight of fear. It made her hold her husband tighter, made her appreciate every sunrise they watched together. "What are you thinking?" Xavier asked one evening when their children were grown and had families of their own. They sat on the same porch they had built decades ago, older now, silver threading through hair that had once been blonde and dark. His hand still fit perfectly in hers. "I am thinking that you gave me the most precious gift," Zelda said. "A choice. That day in Central City you gave me the power to choose my own life." "And you chose me," Xavier said, wonder still in his voice after all these years. "I chose love," Zelda corrected. "I chose freedom. I chose a future worth living. And yes, I chose you. I would choose you again every single day for the rest of my life." Xavier pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the Colorado sky in shades of amber and rose. Their grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter carried on the evening breeze. The horses grazed peacefully in the meadow, and smoke rose from the chimney of the house they had built with their own hands. It was not the life Zelda had been born to. It was better. It was real and hard-won and absolutely theirs. Every scar and struggle had led them here, to this moment of perfect contentment. "I love you," Xavier said, the same words he had spoken thousands of times, and they never grew old. "I love you too," Zelda replied, and meant it with her whole heart. They had grown old together, the cowboy and the woman he had saved. But more importantly, they had grown together, building a life and a legacy that would last long after they were gone. Their children carried their values forward, their grandchildren bore their names, and somewhere, Zelda liked to think, Mary was smiling, glad that her brother had found the happiness she had been denied. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the world in gold, and Zelda and Xavier sat together in the peaceful twilight, their lives complete, their love enduring, their story told. It was a good ending, the kind earned through courage and choice and the simple decision to choose love over fear. And in the high country of Colorado, where aspens whispered ancient songs and the wind carried the scent of pine and wildflowers, a couple who had once been strangers bound by desperation had become something far more precious. Partners, lovers, friends. They had become each other's home. Years continued to pass with the gentle rhythm of seasons. Nathan took over the main operations of the ranch while his siblings found their own paths. The family grew to include great-grandchildren, tiny hands that Zelda and Xavier held with careful joy, marveling at how life perpetuated itself in these small miracles. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration that brought together friends from across Colorado. People who had known them in those early days, who remembered the scandalous story of the runaway bride, and the cowboy who defied one of the territory's most powerful men. The story had grown into local legend, details embellished with time, but the core remained true. It was a story about choosing love, about standing up to cruelty, about building something good from desperate circumstances. William Cornish attended, now retired from the land office and living quietly in Denver. He raised a toast to Mary's memory and to the justice that had finally found Silas Blackthorne. Marshall Garrett came too, bringing his wife and telling stories about the case that had helped make his reputation. But the moment Zelda treasured most was when Xavier pulled her onto the makeshift dance floor their children had built in the barn, and they swayed together to fiddle music while their family looked on. His arms were still strong around her. His eyes still held that same warmth she had seen the day he offered her his hand and a chance at freedom. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder, "for choosing to save me." "Thank you," Xavier whispered back, "for choosing to be saved. And for saving me right back." Because that was the truth of it, Zelda had come to understand. They had saved each other. Xavier had been drowning in grief and guilt before that August day, purposeless and adrift. Zelda had given him a reason to live again, a future to build, a love that healed old wounds. They had rescued each other from their different kinds of prisons and had built something beautiful in the aftermath. As they grew older still, into their 70s and then 80s, the ranch remained a gathering place for their sprawling family. Xavier's hair went white, and Zelda's joints grew stiff with arthritis, but they still sat together on the porch every evening when weather allowed, still held hands, still found comfort in each other's presence. Margaret's husband, the veterinarian, cared for them both with professional skill and personal devotion. Sarah, who had never married but had lived a life rich with friendships and accomplishments, split her time between her own successful breeding operation and helping care for her sister and brother-in-law. "You ever get bored?" Sarah asked Zelda one afternoon when they were shelling peas together. The same stories, the same routine, 45 years with the same person. Zelda smiled. "Love is not about constant excitement," she said. "It is about showing up every day and choosing that person again. It is about building a life together, weathering storms together, celebrating joys together. Your father used to say that courage is acting despite fear. I think love is similar. It is committing despite uncertainty, choosing despite risk." "You and Xavier make it look easy," Sarah said. "It was not always easy," Zelda admitted. "We had hard times, arguments, moments when money was tight or children were sick or the future seemed uncertain. But we faced those things together, and that made all the difference." On a cool September morning when Zelda was 82 and Xavier was 87, they woke in their bed, the same bed they had shared for decades, and Xavier did not get up. He had gone peacefully in his sleep, passing from one kind of rest to another. Zelda held him and wept, knowing that this moment had always been coming but feeling utterly unprepared for it nonetheless. Her children and grandchildren came, surrounding her with love and support, but nothing could fill the Xavier-shaped hole in her world. They buried him on a hillside overlooking the ranch, next to a spot Zelda had already picked out for herself. The funeral was attended by over 200 people whose lives Xavier had touched, directly or indirectly. The preacher spoke of his courage, his kindness, his dedication to justice and family. But Zelda remembered other things. The way he had looked at her that first day, seeing a person worth saving. The patience with which he had taught her to shoot, to ride, to trust. The tenderness in his hands when he had held their newborn children. The quiet strength that had sustained them through all the challenges life had thrown at them. "I will see you again," she promised, her hand on his coffin, "and I will have so much to tell you." Zelda lived another 3 years without Xavier, surrounded by family but feeling his absence in every breath. She told stories about him to her great-grandchildren, making sure they knew about the man who had risked everything for love and justice. She kept the ranch running with Nathan's help, refusing to let Xavier's dream die with him. And when her time finally came, on a spring morning when the wildflowers were blooming just as they had the day Nathan was born, Zelda went peacefully, a smile on her face. Her last words were Xavier's name. They buried her next to him on the hillside, and their shared headstone reads simply, Xavier and Zelda Quentin. They chose love. The ranch continued for generations, managed by their descendants, a lasting testament to what two people could build when they chose courage over fear, love over convenience, freedom over safety. The story of the cowboy who saved a woman from a monster became family legend, passed down through the years, reminding each new generation that sometimes the most important thing you can do is offer someone a choice. And on quiet evenings, when the wind moved through the aspens and the last light touched the mountains, people swore they could see two figures on the old porch, sitting close together, watching the sunset like they had 1,000 times before. The cowboy and his bride together still, their love story complete but never truly ending, because some loves are strong enough to transcend time, to become part of the landscape itself, woven into the earth and sky and the very air. Xavier and Zelda's love was that kind of love, tested by fire and proven true, a beacon for anyone who wondered if happy endings were possible. The answer, their lives proclaimed, was yes. Not easy endings, not perfect endings, but honest ones built on choice and commitment and the daily decision to choose love over everything else. That was the real story, not the dramatic rescue or the dangerous flight or even the villain's downfall. The real story was two people choosing each other, day after day, year after year, building something beautiful and lasting in a wild land. And that story, like all true love stories, never really ends. It echoes forward through children and grandchildren and the land itself, a reminder that even in the hardest times, even when faced with monsters and impossible odds, love can win. Not because it is easy, but because people like Xavier and Zelda have the courage to fight for it. Their legacy lived on in the ranch that still bore the Quentin name, in the horses that carried their breeding lines, in the family traditions that honored both Xavier's sister Mary and Zelda's mother, in the values they had instilled in their children about standing up for what was right even when it was dangerous. The wildflowers still bloomed every spring on the hillside where they rested, and visitors to the area often stopped at the small cemetery to read the headstone and wonder about the lives behind the simple words. Some knew the full story, others only fragments, but all understood that something important had happened here, something worth remembering, because in the end, that August day in 1878 when a cowboy pulled a woman from a wedding carriage was not just about saving one life. It was about affirming that every person has value, that courage can change everything, that love is always worth fighting for. Xavier and Zelda had lived those truths, and their story became a light for others to follow. The ranch house still stood, updated and modernized by successive generations, but retaining its essential character. The porch where they had spent so many evenings remained, and family members made a point to sit there sometimes, especially on anniversaries and special occasions, feeling the connection to those who had come before. And somewhere in the high country wind, in the whisper of aspens and the call of hawks, in the very bones of the land they had loved, Xavier and Zelda's story continued. A story of courage and choice, of rescue and redemption, of a love that had conquered fear and built a legacy that would last forever. It was the kind of story the West was built on, true and wild and beautiful, a testament to the human spirit's capacity for love even in the hardest circumstances. And it all began with a simple choice, a hand extended, a woman brave enough to take it, and a man brave enough to offer it. They chose love. And love, in the end, was everything.